Welcome to the Tech Arena. My name is Allyson Klein, and today I'm delighted to have Jahan Mantin with me. I'll have her introduce herself in a moment, but this podcast is about our series of the future of technology, and the future of teams. Jahan is an expert in looking at how to form teams that are inclusive creators, and I wanted to have her on the show. Welcome to the program, Jahan.
Thank you. Thanks. Happy to be here.
So, John, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself and your background and how you became co-founder of Project Inkblot?
Yeah, sure. I always like to start saying by saying I'm a native New Yorker because,
Mm-hmm.
native New Yorkers, we love to say that. And my background is in publishing, actually, advertising, marketing, also on the kind of editorial side. And I mentioned that because that's where I met Boy Wen, who is the other co-founder of Inkblot. And um, you know, it's a very long story. We started working together. We met as editors and went through various iterations of our work. But we landed on Inkblot when we started to get a lot of work designing um, IRL programs for kind of
Mm-hmm.
like equity minded initiatives, like lots of women's quote unquote entrepreneurship programs, years ago when like that was sort of everywhere. And in doing that work, we started to see a lot of gaps in the processes and gaps in the way that things were being designed. And it really started to occur to us like, we're kind of being starting to get hired to like design things equitably. And this isn't a skill set that is unique only to us. And actually, everyone everyone can engage in this, and it doesn't just, it requires a lot, but one of the things it requires is questioning,
Mm-hmm.
and like critically questioning, like, I know we've always done it this way, but does it have to be this way? It really doesn't. And it also really involves centering the people who are adversely affected or might be adversely affected by what we're creating. And so out of that was, born Inkblot Design, which we used to call Design for Diversity, but it's now Inkblot Design. And it's been quite a ride. It's
Mm-hmm.
been an adventure. Anyone starting their own thing, it's always an adventure. But we were really just, you know, kind of just enthused and like committed to bringing this lens to, tech folks, to media folks, where like the impact is so outsized and can be
Mm-hmm.
great and can also be so damaging. So we were, taking our professional experience, our personal experiences. Um, Boy, one is Chinese, I'm a black woman. Um, and we just were like, our lived experiences are critical to actually the design of these things. It's not like a throwaway. It's not just critical. It actually enhances the process. And we were also really inspired by like, design, justice, principles. The work we're doing, it's not like new. It's not like we're the first people to think about these things. There's actually thousands of people,
Mm-hmm.
you know, already thinking about this, who have already been doing work with this. So we were really inspired by that as well.
When we had a conversation and just talking about Project Inkblot, one of the things that you talked about is your view of the designer community, and it being very broad, and your work with the tech sector. Um, And that's when I knew wanted to have you on my show because we're exploring the future of technology. We're
Mm-hmm.
exploring, the broadening applications of AI, expansion of robotics, all sorts of technologies that are being wielded to solve some of the largest challenges that our planet is facing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my belief that you can't do that unless you actually solve for everyone that is on this planet. Um, and I wanted to talk to you about how you saw. I know that you've worked with a lot of folks in the tech sector. First, how do you define the designer and the design philosophy that goes into Project Inkblot, and how does that relate, do you think, to how we point technology development in the future?
Oh man, okay. It's a great question. And I also read your post on ChatGPT,
Oh,
which
yeah.
was
Thank
great, by
you.
the way. Um, well, our belief is that everyone is a designer. And I say that not to like dismiss or take anything away from folks who like went to design school and like they're a designer. It's in their title. They're really proud of that. They have an identity around it. Doesn't take anything away from that. I did not go that route. But we do believe that like to be human is to be a designer. I think it's like intrinsic to the human experience. It's like you're planning something, you're being deliberate about it, or you might be unconscious about what you're designing, but it's such a part of the human experience. I think it's actually really kind of profound. And I think, to start with, hey, we're actually all designers here, opens up a sense of like agency for
Mm-hmm.
folks. There's a certain agency that comes around with like, oh, I'm making something and I can start to kind of direct, the outcome of it, or I can start to look at like what we're trying to solve here. So I think it's just really like fundamental to the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our stance, and our work is really around design education. It's really around um, okay, there's kind of two facets here. Like we want to support leaders in the design industry, especially in tech and media, for all of the things that you just said. We also want to support Black, Indigenous, POC designers who are focused on projects that are like impacting our well-being. And even in both of these sort of lanes, if you will, there are folks in both of these areas who have arrived with like, yeah, I'm a designer and I know I'm a designer. And then
Mm-hmm.
there are folks who have been like, oh, I've never thought of myself as that before. That offers me something that gives me a sense of agency and how I might um, move forward. And I think that that kind of thinking is really critical to all the things that you've named. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's like a paradigm shift that's like so critically needed. It's not just like a DEI effort where it's like, well, let's hire more people of color, more LGBTQ, etc. Yes, for sure, but you can easily sort of fall into the thinking of the corporation you're working for and still start designing for like one type of person. So I think that starting with, hey, we're all designers is like where we start from.
And then I know that you've worked with a lot of teams on this. When you're thinking about that mental model shift, what is it that you think that organizations need to do to change the dynamic of creation, to change the dynamic of design, to be more inclusive? And I think that, one of the things that you said to me that was really poignant is people were asking us to do design, but it's not like we're the only people that are capable of doing inclusive design. Everyone is. You do not have to be from a population that you're trying to represent to be able to design for that population. So, what do you think it takes to shift the mental model and open up that aperture into inclusivity?
I think it takes a mass of people because
Mm-hmm.
to be honest, like when folks are working inside of these companies, there's so many dynamics. Companies are like there's like their its own organism.
Mm-hmm.
There's like so many things that are happening at one time. But one of the things we really stress in our design education programs, they're like cohort learning programs. There's like a lot of um, importance on not just like strategic ways for us to design differently, but a lot of like focus on relational ways for us to learn about one another and not like in like a kumbaya way necessarily, but just a way for us to get like really curious about like, well, who am I? How do my lived experience impact what I'm designing right now? Because they
Mm-hmm.
are undoubtedly. And who is this person? Like, who is Ben, who I've worked with for 6 years, and I don't know anything really about him. I mean, we've had folks in our sessions like I've literally worked with this person for 5 years, and I just had a like I just learned so much about them
Mm-hmm.
just in this one. How did I not know all these things about you? And so I think it really takes. I mean, it takes so much. But I think one of the places to start is like you need a mass, like you need a critical mass of folks that are like, wait a minute, this doesn't have to be this way. Because just being siloed or having, a few folks in a company that are trying to push for something isn't necessarily going to get us there. But
Mm-hmm.
when you start to get some agitation and activation, it starts to push, um, leaders who might be hesitant or
Mm-hmm.
reticent. And that's critical. And I think the relationship building is actually in some ways more critical than the strategic piece.
Mm-hmm.
Because listen, I've often heard, and sometimes I feel like that too. It's like, burn everything down and just start over. This is a hot mess. But even if you were to burn everything down and start over, you still have to work with people.
Mm-hmm. It's
You,
interesting. You're introducing two concepts that are
mm,
very straightforward and simple, which are we are all designers and we have agency to affect outcomes through that design. But in those two simple concepts, you are absolutely changing the foundations of how work environments function today.
it's totally casual. It's no big deal. It's super easy, Allison.
So tell me, Jahan, how it's been to work, go into a corporate environment and bring these ideas. What have you seen through that process and what's been the outcome?
It has been wild. It
Mm-hmm.
has been. I mean, our programs are never, not never, rarely, very rarely mandatory.
Mm-hmm.
So these programs are like the people that are coming. They want to learn. They want to evolve. They want to be there. They want to join together. Like they see the possibility of something different. And so, in that sense, a lot of them have been really moving. And
Mm-hmm.
to be honest, we our work used to be in person. Obviously, COVID happened. We transitioned virtually, and I was really like did not see the possibility initially. I was like, how are we going to do this online? Like, how
Mm-hmm.
is that even going to work? Like, this is like really deeply relational work. But I mean, it's a different experience, but we've had incredibly kind of connected, moving sessions where folks are sort of opened up to this new possibility, this new way of doing things. So what we do is we introduce practices from
Mm-hmm.
our framework, and some of them are strategic, and some of them are relational, and we practice. We're not in like an ivory tower, like, hey y'all, we figured it out, we got the solution, we know it all, and these sessions you'll know we'll all be designing equitably by the end.
Mm-hmm.
But what it does is it opens up pathways of possibility. And so we'll have
Mm-hmm.
folks say like, hey, I remember we had someone who was like, we have these like edge cases. And but what if they're not all edge cases? Like, why are we looking at edge cases in this way? Can we start to look at this differently? If we have someone that we think is sort of the ideal user, what about creating a profile of someone who might be negatively impacted by what
Oh,
we're
interesting.
building
Mm-hmm.
or might be adversely impacted? Like, that is something that you can just start to bring in to the
Mm-hmm.
design process. We're already using processes all the time. And I know humans, we are, tend to be pretty resistant to new
Mm-hmm.
processes, etc. But it's like this type of creative thinking around equity, around design has been, it's what kind of kept us, it's one of the things that has kept us moving forward is folks like, well, we could try that. We could test that. And it might go the way you want, and it might not go the way you want. But
Mm-hmm.
it's all data. At least you'll discover something that then leads to something else. So we see like a lot of relational kind of breakthroughs. We've seen folks trying on different practices. We've seen folks saying, "Hey, I'm starting to use your, critical questions around your framework and how we're designing." And that's been from like programs to like, "Oh, we need to capture data around this new process we're rolling out and how to capture like gender and racial data in a way that is safe for folks and like intuitive. Like, how can we start to think about that and approach it in this way? So I think it just opens up a lot for folks. And I also have found we found that people have been genuinely like, you know what, I've been thinking about this, and I want a place to go to where I can talk to other people who are thinking about this. And that I'll say is the other thing that we've noticed is that what happens in a lot of companies, no surprise to us, there's just a lot of silos. So
Mm-hmm.
someone can be like, I didn't even know product had tried that out. I didn't
Right.
even know design was trying this thing out. I didn't even know that was happening. And there's like a real opportunity in skill sharing and resource sharing.
Oh
And it's
yeah.
sort of that's been this constant that we're like,
Yeah. Yeah. Corporations as little societies have
totally.
their quirks, but that is something, if you could make a tool that would make communication effortless across teams, you'd make a fortune. Um,
Totally.
so you started Project Inkblot, I think in 2012, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously have gotten a lot of success out of it. And then we enter the pandemic and we enter 2020, and George Floyd happens.
Mm-hmm.
The Black Lives Matter movement gains incredible momentum across the country,
Mm-hmm.
and corporations start responding with inclusivity initiatives and greater interest in leaning forward in this space. What happened for you and your team as corporations became more aware that maybe they should be focusing on inclusivity? And what did the conversation shift at that point?
Oh man, did it? I mean, honestly, we were kind of shell shocked. Like it was really overwhelming
Mm-hmm.
actually initially, and that's not just my experience; it's the experience of a lot of folks who are working in equity, colleagues of ours, partners of ours, friends of ours who are also doing similar or adjacent work. Were like
Mm-hmm.
slammed, and we had to start to get clear on like who do we want to work with. We didn't expect everyone to, you know, be at a certain level, but it became like, let's create a rubric for how we can discern, who do we want to be working with here. And so it it certainly was a incredibly rich learning experience, and we were sort of nonstop for quite some time. And then it also was a really great opportunity because it almost became a forcing mechanism to start to go back to some of the work we had started together at the very, very um, beginning, which I didn't mention, which really centered Black, Indigenous, POC communities. And we really were like, something we started to see, this was like a pattern, was that there were a lot of folks within these companies um, who were Black, Indigenous, and or POC who were like, George Floyd has been publicly murdered, and what am I doing? I can't, how can I apply a lot of these talents and skills at this company to things that are benefiting my community? How can I be of service there? And we started to notice that in ourselves, in our friend circle, in our colleague circle, and folks we were working with. And that was part of the impetus behind launching Incubator, which
Mm-hmm.
is our fellowship for Black, Indigenous, POC technologists, creators, media makers. And that was kind of a monumental shift for us. We did a lot of community based work years ago when we first started, so it was like a return to that work. And it was almost a little hard to put into words how profound that experience was to, bring together folks who were like, if if you're adversely affected, if you're a misrepresented person, if you're dealing with constraints already in terms of, systemic racism or sexism or all these things, you're actually perfectly poised to creative solutioning.
Mm-hmm.
You're the best person to be
Yep.
like, I actually know what could benefit here. I know how we could start to shift things. You're on the front end of the experience of it. And so gathering folks who are like super passionate and fun and joyful and also like grappling and healing and really wanting to come together to say, I have this idea, I really need feedback, I need some space, I need to work through this idea, I need to be connected to opportunities and resources, was incredibly fulfilling uh, for us. So yeah, it was like this long sort of like kind of journey back home in a way. So we definitely still work with um, companies, leading design education programs, um, and that sort of created this social enterprise model, which is how
Mm-hmm.
we kind of how we be now, which is like that work helps to funnel this other work as well.
That's fantastic. Um, I have to ask you about this. Bloomberg came out with a article yesterday, and it announced that DEI roles inside of corporations have fallen by 19% over the last year. And we've seen broader layoffs in the tech sector, but it seems that there's also a pulling back by some companies in terms of their investment in this space. Um, I don't think anybody would say that the job is done. So, do you
Yeah.
how do you work with corporations in this space? How would you view, you think that companies are a little bit at risk of virtue signaling and getting ahead of their skis on what they've claimed versus what they're doing? And how do we, as a designer community, take agency to continue that dialogue um, in the corporate space to ensure that the progress that's been made over the last couple of years doesn't have a backlash that actually hurts the people that we're trying to bring closer to the table?
Yeah. You know, it's funny. We don't even consider ourselves DEI. And
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that has to just kind of, well, first of all, I'll say this. DEI coming in and out is just, it's like the cyclical nature of that, industry, quote unquote, or field. It's in, I mean, really, when you start to really look at like, you're just going through like the 70s, 80s, like what they called it then, they called it something else, but it's still the same thing. And then it comes back in and then it goes, there's like a dip. And then it
Mm-hmm.
comes back again. It's like, we got to bring in DI and then it goes dip. So to me, this is to be expected. And I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of folks working in this field, this is not surprising to anyone. But
Mm-hmm.
we don't even really consider ourselves DEI, and I think that's part of the problem is that DEI is viewed as something that's like ancillary.
Mm-hmm.
It's like this side thing. And then you have like, of course, people are like, we're out of here because you have one person,
Mm-hmm.
for a whole company that's expected to hold this huge initiative. Um, So I think again, there's like this paradigm shift where it's like this isn't a nice to have thing or just something that, is like a numbers game,
It's
all
not
of a
the
numbers
company
game.
picnic that can be
Right.
cut in down years. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. It's like it's not those things. Like when I think about equitable leadership or like really creating products and services and content that can actually work for many people. That's different in my mind than how we think of like DEI.
Mm-hmm.
Like if equity is just embedded into how we work, there's no need for things like DEI. If these are a part of like our principles and our values and like what we live into, we don't need to have this. It's ironic. It's like a segregated department for DEI.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think that that's part of the challenge. Something that comes to mind is a friend of mine that works at Google and was sharing about you know folks having kind of a paradigm shift about a inclusive camera technology they were working on.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm paraphrasing, but the sentiment was like, oh, it's not about making a camera. This is about dignity and
Right.
self-worth and creating something where people can see themselves reflected back and be like, yeah, that's what I look like. That's authentic to how I appear. And that's not just making a camera, that's something else. And so, yeah, and paradigm shifts are not easy. And maybe that won't be reached in this lifetime. I would hope so. But the path forward is so critical.
I think that the follow on to what you're saying is this is not an effort simply to develop internal culture. This is an effort to be the best and best performing business possible. And so it should be something that should be at the foundation of what you're doing.
Exactly. And it's also like it's not going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
The desire for DEI as a reactive
Mm-hmm.
approach is will always, well, I don't know always, but it's there. But in terms of the things you spoke about in the beginning, those what we're dealing with on a planet level, a human level, the criticalness of all of it. I mean, it's felt. We can feel it. We
Mm-hmm.
know, like, things are. This is intense. It's not going to
Mm-hmm.
go away. So it's like we actually need these skills if we're going to be living in the modern world.
I have a couple more questions for you. I just want to make sure we're at the half hour. Do you have a few more minutes?
Sure.
Okay. You talked about incubator and building community engagement, which I think is fantastic. Can
Mm-hmm.
you just share a little bit about what incubator takes folks through in terms of the experience and what does that from tip to tail look like?
Yeah, I'll give kind of a high level overview. I mean, we participated in different incubators before, and they've been really great, like business incubators. But what we found was that there was a gap in terms of particularly what it's like as a person of color to, not have the same necessarily opportunities or be faced with different barriers when it comes to like venture capital or these kind of things. So you go to these business incubators, but there's no conversation around that. So that's a gap.
Mm-hmm.
There's a missing there. And then you might go through like a more kind of equity program, but then there's not things around the other. Like we just saw this gap, and then we had this desire to be, with our people, with our community. So I think of the incubator as like a genuine idea incubator, almost like an ideation lab, which is
Mm-hmm.
something really nice if you have the fortune to like, to have gone to like college. You have a lot of space to do a lot of like thinking. That's what you're there for, like ideating and ruminating, but not as much when it comes to, you know, you have a professional life or you're working and like you're a parent and like all these things. So the incubator is a space for folks to come together, like a super nurturing space for folks to come with their ideas. And there people were at different levels. Some were like I worked on this project for a while. One was around like migrant workers. One was around like um, uh, a technological piece app around like agriculture and black farmers. There was just like a variety of different projects. And folks were at different stages. And what they really were looking for was like feedback. And
Mm-hmm.
especially now, like people were like super isolated. There was some folks that were like in major cities, less folks that were maybe more rural areas. And they're like, I have no one to talk to about this. I want to talk to other folks who I trust, who are also committed to um, equity, who want to create projects that are benefiting our communities. And I really need to think this through. So we used some practices and key elements from our framework. Our framework is divided up into three kind of sections, and within those sections are various practices to try on. But the first is like, who are you? Like, actually, who the hell are you? How is
Mm-hmm.
that impacting what you're designing? Um, what are you designing? Is it useful? Is it necessary? Are you the person to be designing it? I mean, there's so many questions that come up in that inquiry. And who are you going to design it with? Are folks who might be most negatively impacted, do they get to be designers too in this process? And
Mm-hmm.
how can you work with folks so that we're really building something that's of value? So we took them through a bunch of different activities, lots of conversation, lots of folks kind of trying on different practices. The idea was like, let's kind of birth this project out into the world, but let's give a space that is intentionally slower. That's
Mm-hmm.
kind of the antidote to fail fast and break things, where we're not going to actually put in um, metrics around like profit. Doesn't mean you can't have a profitable project, obviously, but we're going to remove all those things just for right now. It's an 8-week program
Mm-hmm.
so that you can get the feedback, be with your idea, really. And it's like people had a ton of breakthroughs.
I bet.
It,
That's
it was,
fantastic.
yeah, it was deep.
That's awesome. I love that you're evolving too. That's wonderful to see.
Thanks.
What's next for Project Inkblot?
Oh my gosh, what's next? Well, I'm excited to say that we have our first ever public cohort learning um, program that we're running. And that's kind of like a big thing for us because our programs have been run inside of companies. But we
Mm-hmm.
got feedback from folks who were like, well, I'm not in a company, but I really want to do this program. So we're like, well, let's gather some folks. So that's starting February 16th. We have a few spots left. Folks can go to projectinkblot.com and they'll see the banner to sign up.
Mm-hmm.
And that introduces folks to our framework and really has folks trying on some of the practices, starting to investigate case studies of equitable and inequitable design. Um, and I think what's really critical is also meeting other people in various industries, um, mostly kind of tech media folks, but still like folks that are in adjacent or similar industries that are also kind of leaders in their field who are really wanting to connect to other people to say like, oh, were you in this? Wait, I'm in this too. What can we build? So we're going to be running that. And the other thing is kind of to your point is it's really easy to get frustrated too in
Mm-hmm.
this field or to just feel like, it's not moving as, but yeah, just, it's not moving as fast as we know it needs to move. And it can make you want to pull your hair out sometimes. And so you can't do equity work alone. It's actually impossible. I don't think it's possible. You have
Mm-hmm.
to do it in community. So that's a major um, impetus for us to run this.
That's fantastic. I love what you're doing. I love
Thank you.
everything about what you've talked about today. Jahan, I'm sure that other people who are listening online also have loved the things that you're saying and would
Thank
like to
you.
engage. So, where do we send them to engage with you and the team and learn more about future incubators, the educational
Yes.
programs, etc.?
Yes. You can go to projectinkblot.com. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can join our next cohort. If you're interested in incubator, definitely sign up. We'll have communications out for our program, which will happen again this fall. And folks can also shoot me a line too. I'm just at Jahan at projectinkblot.com and always happy to chat with folks.
Thanks so much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Allison.
All right.